Hello, my name is Dustin Lake with Aventura. I'm excited to present to you today our Roaming Aware Desktop, an innovative software platform that significantly enhances the way doctors and nurses provide patient care. It does this by reducing clicks and reducing the amount of time you spend waiting on technology so you could spend more time caring for your patients. Now in the demo I'll be showing you today a couple workflows, some with doctors, some with nurses, and I'll show you what Aventura does to enhance the workflow. As you look at our demo set up here, on your left-hand side you'll see that we have a nurse station, and on the right-hand side you'll see that we have a patient room. And Aventura will act differently depending on who you are and where you are. Now, I'd like to start off by talking about what does it look like to deploy Aventura into your hospital environment. Aventura gets deployed on top of virtual machines in your data center. How many virtual machines you need just depends on what is your maximum concurrent user load, how many data centers do you have, and if one data center were to go down during that peak load, we want to make sure that your backup data center can handle that load. Once we've got our software in your data center, the next step is to go out onto the hospital floor and install our workstation client on each one of your endpoint devices. Now, it doesn't matter whether your endpoint is a laptop like you see here, a tablet like you see here, or even a thin client. Aventura is compatible with all these endpoint devices. Now that we've got your software in your data center and we've got our workstation client deployed on each one of your endpoints, the last step is giving your clinicians access. Now, by far the most popular method of access are using proximity cards. These are popular because these are already typically in use for door systems, so doctors and nurses don't need to attach an extra badge to their body to be able to access the systems. They can use the same badge they're using for their doors. Now, as a nurse, to begin my shift, I can walk up to any available workstation to begin my day. Now, when I walk up to a workstation, to start my session, I simply tap my card. Now, when I tap my card, you'll see that Aventura is prompting for a two-factor authentication because I'm tapping with something I have, my card, and I'm entering something I know, which is my password. Now, when Aventura connects me to my desktop, you'll see that it's connecting me to a Windows Terminal Services session in this case. And what we'll do is we'll look at what is your role, a nurse, where are you at, a nurse station, and we mold the desktop for you at this location. Now, what I mean by molding the desktop is we give you the correct desktop icons. We also auto-launch the applications that are appropriate for this location, such as Patient Coach software, your email. We can also auto-launch your EMR and perform single sign-on to it, all at the tap of your card, so that within less than 5 seconds, I have all the information I need to begin my shift at my fingertips. Now, as a nurse, I might look at my patient census in my EMR, get a feel for what my rounds look like, and then I'm ready to begin. To begin my rounds, I simply tap my card, which you'll see instantaneously secures my session here, but it also makes this workstation available for any other clinician who might want to use it. So the days of clinicians doing Control-Alt-Delete and locking a workstation and holding it hostage for the rest of the day is a workflow of the past. Now, as I walk down the hallway into the patient room, you'll see again, I'll tap my card. When I tap the card, again, I'm being prompted for my two-factor authentication, but unlike the nurse station where I was only allowed to use my card and a password, Aventura has it configured at this location so I can use my card and a password or a shorter PIN. Another thing I want to point out is in the background, we are already molding your desktop even though I haven't even logged in yet. So in the background, we're auto-launching the applications you need. We're giving you the correct desktop icons. We're performing single sign-on. We're also setting your correct default printer to the printer that's closest to this current location. All of that so that by the time you're done entering your short password or PIN, the desktop's ready for you to go within a matter of seconds. Now, as we connect to the desktop here, you'll see that it looked a little bit different than it did at the nurse station. At the nurse station, you'll notice that we had our email up and visible. But in the patient room, email is not part of the workflow. So what Aventura does is it restricts that application by hiding it. Now, in the process of that, you don't lose any data. If you're in the middle of an email, you can quickly go back to the nurse station, and when you tap in, you'll see that you can pick up in your email right where you left off. So now we're going to introduce another clinician to the workflow, this time a doctor. Much like the nurse, the doctor can walk up to any available workstation in their environment and tap their card to begin their session. Again, the doctor is being prompted for a two-factor authentication at this device, much like the nurse was. You'll see this is the first logon for the doctor of the day, so we're starting their session. And once we start the session, again, we're looking at who they are, a doctor, where they're at, a nurse station, and again, we mold the desktop for the workflow that's appropriate for them. We're giving them the appropriate applications, setting their correct default Windows printer, giving them the appropriate icons on the desktop, auto-launching their EMRs, and doing single sign-on into these applications, all with the tap of your card. Now, as a doctor, I might be sitting here working, but we could say, hey, you know what? I hear a code. A code's occurring in the patient room where the nurse is actively working right now. So I jump up out of my chair and I run down the hallway into the exam room. You'll notice the doctor didn't tap out at the nurse station. When the doctor walks into the room where the nurse is actively engaged with the patient, you'll see that the second I tap my card, Aventura will take care of instantaneously disconnecting any unsecured session you had elsewhere in the hospital environment. Also, you'll notice here at the nurse station where the nurse was working, we took care of securing the nurse's session. We're also prompting the doctor for their two-factor authentication at the exam room. In the background, we're already molding their session. And you'll see within a matter of seconds, a doctor can tap in his patient's room and immediately begin working their applications. But let's say that the nurse wasn't quite done working yet. The nurse can tap right back over the doctor and get right back into their session with their applications, looking at the information that's appropriate for them. Let's say the doctor needed to get back in and order some medications. A doctor can tap right back over the nurse, get back into their EMR, order the medications they needed for the patient. Let's say the nurse needed to get back in and make some notes that the medication has been administered. The nurse can tap right back over the doctor again and get back into their session. This is what we call fast user switching. This is highly valuable in locations where you might only have one computer in a room, but you might have multiple clinicians working in the same area. Think about an emergency department where you might have a doctor, a nurse, and a technician all working in the same room. In environments without Aventura, what I typically see happen in those scenarios is the first clinician in the room logs into the workstation, but then every other clinician who subsequently walks into the room just taps them on the shoulder and says, hey, can I jump onto that session real quick and look at some information? They do that because it's fast and it's efficient, but they break every security and HIPAA policy in the hospital in the process. But with Aventura, what we're seeing is because the clinicians can tap in and get access to their desktop in less than 5 seconds every time, they're no longer having to invent workarounds to be more efficient. And this also keeps the security side of the house happy because they're getting their checkbox met with their two-factor authentication needs. Now, everything I've shown you in this demo so far has involved two-factor authentication. But in some areas, Aventura can actually configure what we call step-down authentication. You'll notice now that when the doctor comes back to their nurse station and taps in here, instead of being prompted for the two-factor authentication, you'll see that this time they got right into their desktop just with the tap of a card. Aventura is highly customizable when it comes to authentication. Again, two-factor with password and PIN, or even step-down authentication. And all these rules can be configurable based on who you are and where you are. I'm going to introduce another clinician to the workflow now, and unlike the other clinicians, this clinician is going to get a Citrix Zen app published desktop as their session, and they're also going to introduce a mobile computing device into their workflow. Like any other clinician, I can walk up to any other device that's available and simply tap my card to begin my session. Because this is a mobile user, a double tap is required to start your session. You'll see that once we've connected you to your desktop, Aventura has identified who you are, a doctor, where you're at, a nurse station, and again, we've molded the desktop for you appropriately. Now as a doctor, I might begin reading some emails while I'm here at the nurse station, but then I might hear my name called over the PA asking me to come visit the nurse in the patient room for a consultation. So at this point, what I can do is I can pick up my tablet and move my session from the physical workstation to my mobile device. Now, once my session's moved over, I can start reading my email and my patient information as I walk down the hallway. But now that I'm in the patient room, the only challenge is that this tablet doesn't know that I've changed locations. My printers and my application set all still think I'm over at the nurse station where I started my session. But with Aventura, it's easy to bring location awareness to this device. I can simply walk into the room and tap my card where the nurse is currently working. You'll see that when I tap my card, I don't impact the nurse's session, and instead what I do is I bring location awareness to the mobile device. So what we've just done is we've just updated the default printer to the printer that's closest to this particular exam room. We've also restricted the applications not appropriate for this location, so that with the tap of a card, I can quickly begin my consultation with the nurse. Now, while this is a great viewing device, this is not a great input device. So if I did want to make some notes, I might want to transfer my session back over to the physical device here. And to do that, all I've got to do is double tap my session. But you'll see, while I was consulting with the nurse working in this patient room, our obscure screen actually invoked on this exam computer here where the nurse was working. This is brought up just to protect patient information that might be visible on the screen. That way other family members walking in and out of the room, or even other patients walking down the hallway in the hospital, can't see the patient information visible on the screen. If the nurse wanted to get back to their chart, the nurse can simply either move their mouse or hit a keystroke on their keyboard. As a doctor, if I want to move my session from my tablet over to the physical device, all I need to do is another double tap. You'll see upon a double tap, it prompts me for my two-factor authentication. It then connects the session that was on my mobile device to the physical workstation. At this point, I could take full advantage of the larger monitor and the keyboard to enter any information I needed to about this patient. And if I was ready to go back to my nurse station or go visit another patient, it's easy to reconnect my session back to my mobile device and continue with my workflow. So far, you've seen clinicians all get a full-blown roaming desktop for their workflow, but there's several specialties in the hospital that don't need a full-blown desktop. They only need a single application to perform their functions. Here's one such user who works in environmental services. The only thing they need to do is mark whether a room's clean or dirty. This user will access their desktop similar to other clinicians by tapping their card. You'll see in this case, rather than getting a full-blown desktop, this user just gets the single application they need to perform their functions. This helps reduce resource overheads required on the back end. And again, when this user is done with their application, they simply tap their card to secure their session. Now, much like this user, who's an environmental services user and only requires a single application, there's other roles in the hospital that require applications that are non-clinical. In this case, we have someone from the IT department who's on the floor helping a clinician. You'll see that when the person from IT taps in, rather than getting a bunch of clinical applications, they get the applications they need to help administer their environment. And again, to secure their session, all they need to do is tap out. To find out more about how Aventura can help you, reach out to our website at www.AventuraHQ.com or feel free to reach out to one of our sales associates.